It happened during the first semester of my freshman year, about 20 years ago. One night, around 9 p.m., I needed to print a homework assignment. The printers were only available in the lobby downstairs, so I headed down. As I reached the lobby, I noticed a man standing just outside the glass doors. He looked out of place, older than most students, until I saw the pizza box in his hand. Just a pizza delivery guy. College kids ordered pizza all the time. He gave me a small wave and I shook my head, signaling I wasn't the one who ordered. But then he knocked, gesturing for me to come over. I hesitated but walked to the door and cracked it open. "I didn't order pizza," I said. He smiled. "That's fine. The kid who ordered had it sent to his room, but I can't get inside without someone letting me in." Something about it felt off. But I was younger then, not as cautious. I shrugged and let him inside. He walked off and I finished printing my assignment. I didn't think about it again until later that night. Around 11 p.m., my roommate and I were winding down, playing video games before heading to bed. We turned off the lights and drifted off to sleep. At some point, I woke up to a faint sound, the soft click of our doorknob turning. Still groggy, I glanced over at my roommate's bed. He was out cold. The sound didn't stop. My heart started to pound. I got up, careful not to make any noise, and looked toward the door. It was the pizza guy. He was trying to get into our room. Panic surged through me. I rushed to my roommate, shaking him awake. He blinked in confusion, but before I could explain, the door creaked open. The man stood there, his eyes locking on us. His expression shifted from surprise to something darker, more menacing. "You're not supposed to be awake," he muttered, stepping inside. My roommate jolted upright. "Get out," he yelled. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly reached into a bag he was carrying. "You don't want to know what's in here," he said softly, his voice full of quiet threat. Time seemed to slow. My mind raced. My roommate, without missing a beat, darted to the window. We'd cracked it open earlier because of the heat. Now, he shoved it wide open and without a second thought, climbed out. The man took a step toward him, but I didn't wait. I followed my roommate, jumping out into the night air. We hit the ground running, our bare feet slapping against the concrete, the man chasing after us. We sprinted across the campus, adrenaline fueling every step. It wasn't until we reached a well-lit street and spotted a campus patrol car that we slowed down. The man, he was gone. We flagged down the patrol, breathless, and told him everything. The police searched the dorm, but the pizza guy had vanished. They never found him. I still don't know what he had planned that night, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he stepped into our room. It was my first semester at Westbrook University, and I'd gotten my roommate's information ahead of time. His name was Daniel. This was back in 2015. We'd exchanged a few messages before the semester started, but due to some family emergency, Daniel had to transfer out before school even began. So while everyone else was busy meeting their roommates, I spent the first weekend alone, still waiting for a replacement. I did meet some people on my floor, though. Most were friendly. But on Sunday night, something strange happened. My roommate finally showed up. I was walking back to my dorm when I noticed a guy, backpack slung over one shoulder, wandering the hall, looking a little lost. I figured he was new and asked if he'd just been moved into the building. He nodded, looking distracted. "Are you in room 307? I asked. He glanced up, squinting for a second, then nodded again. "Yeah, that's my room," he said. "Cool. I'm Ethan," I said, shaking his hand. "Call me Josh," he replied. Something about his voice was off, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. His hand lingered just a little too long in the handshake. I led Josh to the room, already half furnished from my side. His half was still bare. He dropped his backpack on the bed and gave me this strange, tight-lipped smile. "Haven't brought my stuff yet," he muttered, his accent subtle but unfamiliar. He pulled a single sheet from his bag and tossed it over the bare mattress, like that was enough for the night. It was already past 9, and classes started the next day. Josh and I sat on our respective beds, making awkward small talk. I tried to get a read on him, like you do when you meet someone new, especially a roommate. But he was odd. His deep voice didn't match his quiet demeanor, and there was this weird tension in the air, like he was holding something back. Maybe he was just nervous. Eventually, he lay down on his bed, using his backpack as a pillow. No blanket, no comforter, just that flimsy sheet. It looked uncomfortable, to say the least. I offered him one of my spare pillows, and he accepted it without much enthusiasm. After that, I fell asleep, but sometime in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. I didn't know why. The room was dead silent. No rustling, no breathing from Josh's side of the room. I shifted, and that's when I saw him, a tall figure looming over me. I screamed. Josh stumbled back, mumbling, "Sorry, just heading to the bathroom." My heart was racing. Why the hell had he been standing there like that? I couldn't bring myself to ask. My voice felt stuck in my throat, so I just mumbled, "It's fine," and turned my back to him, trying to shake off the feeling. But sleep was impossible after that. The next morning I got up early, still rattled. Josh was in bed, pretending to sleep, or maybe he really was. I couldn't tell. As I packed my things for class, I had this weird feeling like someone had gone through my stuff. I glanced over at Josh, still motionless, but something about it felt wrong. I grabbed a few valuables and shoved them into my backpack before heading to class. I wasn't taking any chances. Between lectures, I emailed the housing department requesting a room change. I couldn't explain it, but something about Josh made my skin crawl. When I got back to the dorm later, I noticed the door was propped open with a stopper. Inside, Josh had a large duffel bag sitting on his bed, but he wasn't unpacking it. He just stared at me, his face expressionless. I pretended not to notice, but the unease was growing. Eventually, he climbed into bed and lay there, scrolling through his phone in silence. I left for dinner, hoping he'd be gone when I returned, but he was still there, as if he never left. "Do you have class today?" I asked, trying to make sense of his strange behavior. "Yeah," he said, without looking up from his phone. "Just one." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. Every time I glanced over, he was either leaning against the wall or lying in bed, his phone glowing, always facing me. I was on edge, waiting for a response from the housing department. When I finally checked my email, my heart sank. The reply was short but confusing. "Your replacement roommate has not yet been assigned. There should be no one else in the room with you." I froze, slowly turning to look at Josh. He met my eyes, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't supposed to be there. I grabbed my essentials, packed them quickly, and left without saying a word. He watched the whole time, not moving, not speaking. He knew I'd figured it out. I went straight to campus security, reporting him. By the time they got to the dorm, Josh, or whatever his real name was, gone. He'd taken some of my clothes, my charger, even some food. As for what he was doing standing over me that night, I don't want to think about it. All I know is, I had a stranger, maybe homeless, maybe worse, sharing my room for nearly 24 hours. My real roommate showed up 2 days later. I was 22 at the time, a student working on my master's degree in a small town in northern Italy. Because of the late night schedule, my classes ended around 9 p.m. on a chilly November evening. I lived just a short walk from campus, about 10 minutes, and my boyfriend's place wasn't far off either. After class, I said goodbye to my friends and decided to take a different route home, one that cut through a small old park nestled between the university's main building and a deserted library. That night changed how I saw that park forever. The path through the park was narrow and winding, flanked by tall, looming trees. It was poorly lit, save for a faint glow from a nearby chapel. Usually I felt safe there, even at night. Other students walked the path frequently, but this night was different. The cold seemed sharper, the shadows darker. I'm someone who gets nervous easily, especially when I'm alone in the dark. As I walked, my heart began to race, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. That's when I saw him, standing by one of the trees, barely noticeable at first. My legs kept moving forward, but inside I froze. We locked eyes for a moment and he stepped out from behind the tree. He was just a few feet away. He wasn't particularly intimidating at first glance. A middle-aged man, maybe in his late 40s, with a slight build. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets. Still, there was something wrong. He didn't look like a normal person. I tried to walk past him, hoping he'd just let me go, but instead he lunged forward and grabbed my arm, yanking me around to face him. Fear surged through me, paralyzing every rational thought. I stammered, "Let go of me. I'll call the police." My voice shook as I tried to sound stronger than I felt. He smiled, a cold, empty smile. "You won't get the chance," he whispered. My heart stopped. In that moment, I was sure something horrible was about to happen. But just as panic began to consume me, I heard footsteps, distant but approaching fast. Both of us looked toward the sound. A couple was walking toward us, hand in hand, chatting quietly. The man's grip loosened, and in a split second, He bolted into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, shaking, as the couple neared. They looked at me with concern, having seen him run off, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. I just turned and ran, my feet hitting the pavement harder with every step until I was back in the safety of the streetlights. As soon as I hit the main road, I called my boyfriend, sobbing. He rushed over to meet me and walked me the rest of the way home. I thought about going to the police, but by the time I calmed down, the man was long gone. What could they even do? I felt foolish, and a strange shame kept me from reporting it. From that night on, whenever my classes ended late, my boyfriend waited for me outside the building to walk me home, and I always kept pepper spray in my pocket just in case. When I was in my second year at Crestview University, I had a single room in an older dorm building. It was quiet, which I thought would be perfect for studying. But after a while, the silence became suffocating. Most nights I'd just sit in my room, scrolling through my phone or reading, trying to distract myself. Then, for about a week straight, something strange started happening. Every night, just after midnight, there'd be a knock at my door. Not a loud, aggressive knock, just a slow, deliberate tap. Every time I opened the door, no one was there. The hallway was empty. I figured it was some late-night prank, so after a few nights, I stopped bothering to check. But the knocking didn't stop. It got under my skin. I'd lay in bed, waiting for it, tense and uneasy. Then, one night, it just stopped. The next day, my friend Mark hit me up, asking if I wanted to go to this house party off campus. I'm not much of a party guy, and I wasn't really feeling up for it. But after the weirdness with the knocking, I needed to get out of my room. So I said yes. That decision changed everything. The party was packed, people squeezed into every corner, music blasting, the air thick with sweat and alcohol. I wasn't feeling it. I grabbed a soda and stood by the wall, watching the chaos around me. After a while, I told Mark I was heading out, using an early class as an excuse. That's when I noticed him, a guy by the kitchen counter, standing still in the middle of the crowd, just watching me. Our eyes met for a second, and then he turned to mix a drink. He moved strangely, too precise, like he didn't want anyone to notice what he was doing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A quick flick of his wrist. Something fell into the drink he was holding. I froze, as the party's noise faded into the background. Had I really just seen that? The guy turned, drink in hand, and headed straight toward me. "Here," he said, offering the cup with a smile. I didn't take it. "I saw what you did," I said, my voice steady, but inside I was shaking. The room seemed to pause for a moment, then a few chuckles echoed around me. The guy smirked. "What are you talking about?" I pointed to the cup. "What's that stuff floating on top then?" He looked down at it, his face tightening for just a second before quickly hiding it behind a laugh. "It's just foam. Relax, man." I reached for someone else's drink, holding them side by side. Only his had that strange white foam on top. It wasn't carbonation, it was something else. Before I could say anything, someone next to me, a guy I didn't even know, spoke up. "That's messed up, dude. What the hell did you put in that?" That's when things went south. A group of guys near the kitchen, clearly drunk, stepped up. One of them slurred, "You starting something." I didn't back down. I saw him spike the drink. The guy with the cup sneered. "You don't know what you're talking about, man. Maybe you've just never been to a real party before." The whole thing felt off. They weren't just messing around, they were all in on it. I felt a deep sense of dread. I didn't want any part of this. I left without another word, walking quickly back to my dorm. That night I locked my door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wanted to report it, but the fear of getting in trouble held me back. Alcohol wasn't allowed on campus, and I'd seen people get kicked out for less. Then the knocking started again. At first it was like before, just a tap in the middle of the night, but then it got louder, more frequent. One night, when I opened the door, I found a note lying on the floor. Scrawled in messy handwriting, it said, "They know about you." I stared at the words, my mind racing. Whoever had been knocking, they weren't just trying to mess with me anymore. About 6 years ago, when I was 19, I was attending college far from home, around 2,000 miles away. I opted to stay in the dorms, even though they were ridiculously expensive. But I didn't really have a choice. My roommate was nice enough, a bit quiet, but that didn't bother me. One afternoon, after my last class, I grabbed lunch from a campus cafe and sat outside on a bench. As I started eating, I noticed a guy a few benches over, just staring at me. It felt weird, but I shrugged it off. People do strange things sometimes. I turned my attention back to my phone, trying to act like it didn't bother me. A few seconds later, I glanced up. He was still staring, like he hadn't even blinked. My stomach knotted a bit. I shoveled down my food quickly, tossed the trash, and headed back to my dorm. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole way to make sure he wasn't following me. When I got inside, my roommate noticed the look on my face. "What's up with you?" I told her about the guy. She just shrugged. "Creeps are everywhere. Don't worry about it." Fast forward to that night. My roommate was asleep and I was watching a movie, trying to forget about the whole thing. At some point, I needed to use the bathroom. It was late and the hallway was dead quiet. I made my way to the restroom, did what I needed to, and as I was about to leave, something caught my eye. Literally, through the tiny crack of the stall door, I saw an eye staring right at me. I froze, then screamed as I slammed the door open. It was him, the guy from the bench. He was crouched down, his face level with the floor. I didn't stop to think. I bolted out of there and raced back to my room. My roommate sat up, annoyed. What the hell's going on? I was shaking, barely able to get the words out. It's him, the guy from earlier. He was in the bathroom. She believed me instantly. We called campus security, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. It's been 2 months now. I haven't seen him since, and I pray I never do. It was the spring semester, and finals week was creeping up fast. I had several major projects piling up, and honestly, I needed to get ahead. I'm an engineering major, so I've gotten used to tough classes, but I always find it easier to study in places like the library or a classroom rather than my own room. Most people wouldn't choose to study on a Friday night, but I had plans for the weekend and figured it'd be better to get my work done early. Around 9 p.m., I made my way to the engineering hall. Of course, when I got there, the doors were locked. It's a normal thing, and students can call a security guard to let them in, as long as you show your ID. So, I did that, and when the door finally clicked open, I stepped inside. The building was dead silent, dark except for the emergency lights. It felt weird being the only person there. I walked down the first hallway and spotted a classroom I recognized, one I had actually taken a class in before. I turned on the light and sat down at a desk, getting to work. I was pretty focused, just chipping away at the projects. It was maybe an hour later when I heard footsteps. I looked up, surprised, and saw the door open. A guy stepped inside. He was wearing a red sweatshirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. He paused in the doorway and asked, "Mind if I study here too?" I was a little thrown off. There were plenty of empty classrooms, and I didn't know who this guy was. But I didn't want to seem rude, so I nodded, sure. He dropped his backpack onto the first desk in the front of the room and sat down. I didn't think much of it, but I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. I went back to my desk in the back, the one I usually sat at for class, trying to refocus. But after a while, I glanced over at him again. His backpack was still on the floor. He hadn't opened it, hadn't taken anything out. He was just sitting there, staring ahead, completely still, not even on his phone. I tried to shake it off, but the guy's stillness was starting to mess with my head. It was getting late, almost 11 p.m., and I decided to pack up. I closed my laptop, shoved my book into my bag, and stood up. As I passed him, I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't say anything, didn't move. It was like he was waiting for something. I left the room and walked down the hallway toward the entrance. That's when I heard it, footsteps again, following me. I knew it was him. Nobody else had been in the building. I sped up. When I stepped out into the parking lot, I saw that there was only one other car parked there. And sure enough, it was his. He came out of the building and headed straight for his car. I didn't know what to make of it, but I decided to head home. My apartment was just a few blocks away from campus. I drove there with him tailing me the whole way. When I parked, I noticed something odd. His car stopped a few spaces away from mine, but he stayed inside. I wasn't sure why that made me feel better, but it did. I went inside, trying to push it all out of my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I went up to my window and watched. His car was still there, parked under the lights, just sitting there. The hours dragged on. By the time I was lying in bed, ready to fall asleep, his car was still there. It had to be past 2 a.m. by then. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up and glanced outside. The guy's car was gone, but something else caught my eye. On the outside of my front door, near the lock and on the side where the door opens, I noticed deep scratches and small dents. It hit me then. He had tried to break into my apartment while I was asleep. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but the whole thing still haunts me. I wonder if I'll ever find out why he was watching me that night.